All right. Shavua Tov, good to see everyone. We're on Yoma Daf Kaf Aleph, and we plan to finish the first perek of Masechet Yoma. The topic tonight is fun. We're talking about the 10 different miracles that happened in the Bet HaMikdash. So this relates to the Mishnah, because the Mishnah mentioned that on holidays, on the Chagim, Shalosh Regalim, so many people would come to the Bet HaMikdash, and that by time the rooster crowed at dawn, already the entire courtyard was full. That's why they had to begin the Turumat Hadeshin from the middle of the night. So since we're talking about all the people that came, we're wondering how did they fit? So here, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Bishash Yisrael olin laregel omedim sefufim umishtachavim revachim. Amazingly, even though they were all standing crowded right next to each other, but when it came time to bow, miraculously they had room. I mean, this would apply in Yom Kippur when they have to prostrate, but also on the holidays during regular prayers, whenever people are bowing, they would need more room, and they magically, miraculously had room. And furthermore, that they would extend to the 11 amot behind the kaporet. I'll show you on the drawing here. So generally, Kohanim only can go past here. This is Zrat Yisrael. So Yisrael are allowed in Zrat Nashim, right? We mentioned it's not only for women, but men and women were here. Men could go further through Nicanor Gate and stand in this section, but after that, only Kohanim could go. So there's no Yisrael is allowed anywhere from the Mizbeach until the end of where the Kodesh Kodashim is, what we call Beta Kaporet. However, behind that, there's another 11 amot. Right, this would be 11 by 130 something, so maybe about 18 or 20 feet. So a short strip, but very long. So you could fit maybe a couple hundred people there, a few hundred people there. So they would extend to this area. Now, how would they get there? They weren't allowed to walk through, but what they could do is they can go out and around the back and come into that section. So because there were so many people, it's like on the holidays, they put the folding chairs in the aisle, right? So they don't usually go there, but because they needed the extra room, they would go there as well. Now the question is, my kamad, what's the relationship between these two things? Are you telling me that they would stand all close to each other, but at the time of bowing, then they would extend to the other side? I understand it's a miracle, but even miracles have to make some sense, right? I mean, I understand the expanding space, but they would jump over to the other side and then jump back when they were finished bowing. We're not clear on this. Hachi Kamar, here's the explanation. So it's saying two different things. This 11 amot behind the kaporet was going on the first statement, that it was full, the whole chassid was full, they even used that overflow room on the other side. And furthermore, even while being so full, when they bowed in all those areas, they were able to have room and not bump into each other. And this is one of 10 miracles that happened in the Mikdash. It's ironic to read this the day after the tragedy in Meron. So we see in the Bet HaMikdash, they were concerned about crowd control. They could rely on miracles, but when you don't rely on miracles, then you do have a problem. So Ditnan, let's see all the 10 of them, comes from Pirkei Avot. Asara nisim na'asu bebet hamikdash. Lo hepila isha merech besar hakodesh. So here's a list of 10 miracles happened in Bet HaMikdash. Number one, there was a smell of barbecue all the time. Smelled fantastic. So everybody wanted. Okay, so most people, smells good, but they're okay. But pregnant women, when they have a craving and they don't get it, it could be dangerous for them. And they're not allowed to eat this. These are things that are korbanot, that either are an olah or only the kohanim can eat it. So the women were not allowed to eat it. Nevertheless, even though these pregnant women had a craving, no one ever had a miscarriage from it. Interesting miracle to come up with, right? Furthermore, the holy meat never went bad, even though like a shilamim you can eat for 2 days. They didn't have refrigeration, so how did it stay good? That miraculously that it never spoiled. And even though they were doing shechita, many animals, and cleaning them out, and often if you have that, then there's flies come and gather, but no flies around around there. It is interesting because there were in one of the ancient Near Eastern texts, it says that when in the Noah, the Gilgamesh epic, right? It says after the flood, and he made a sacrifice for the first time. It says the gods, it's polytheistic. The gods came and swarmed around the sacrifice like flies. So I don't think they knew about that, but this is the opposite. ולא הראה קרי לכהן גדול ביום הכיפורים, and the Kohen Gadol never saw a seminal emission. It never became tameh on Yom Kippur. I mean, I hope they had all those preparations before and they gave him the right diet and all that. It was interesting because you see, even though they are miracles, but they also have a naturalistic aspect. In other words, they didn't just rely on the miracle, right? They said, no, we got to do everything we can to make sure that'll become tahor, as we saw in the previous pages. These are three things that were made from flour, the omed that we bring on the second day of Pesach from barley, the two lechem that we bring on Shavuot from wheat, and lechem apanim that was changed out every week. They never went bad. It's good. It's a good thing that happened because they didn't make extra. These things, the lechem and lechem apanim, were made before Shabbat and before Yom Tov. And so they wouldn't cook extra, because since you could do it before, there's no need to do it on Shabbat or on Yom Tov. So they didn't have any extra if it spoiled or went bad or anything or became tameh. So miraculously, they never had that problem. Here's ours. That's why we brought this whole thing in the first place. That although they were so crowded and bumper to bumper, nevertheless, when they bowed, there was space. No one ever got hurt by a snake or a scorpion in Jerusalem. Here's this picture of a scorpion. And no one ever said, oh, there's no space, there's nowhere to stay in Jerusalem, even though you had lots of people coming from all over for the pilgrimage, for the holiday. Everyone found a place to stay. There were Airbnbs always available. Hopefully that should happen today. The rental prices in Jerusalem are through the roof. Okay, there is a commentary by Rav Shem Tov Ibn Shafrut that explains all these in a naturalistic way. There was always room because people always loved each other, and so they said, "Come over, stay by me, stay on the couch." Right? They always found a way, and the Kohanim were always very efficient in preparing the meat, so they wouldn't attract flies and so on. So you can explain them in a naturalistic way. I think I think the rabbis have in mind the combination that we do our best to make sure, and their best was successful. Good. Patach b'mikdash v'siyam b'Yerushalayim. Now the question here is, we mentioned in the beginning that there are 10 miracles that happened in the Bet HaMikdash, but the last two are not in the Bet HaMikdash. That no one ever got stung by a scorpion, or that there was always apartments available in Jerusalem. Those are Jerusalem miracles, not Bet HaMikdash miracles. So really, there's only 8 in the Bet HaMikdash itself. So what are you going to do about that? Oh, there's 2 more. I know it didn't say it in the Mishnah, but we can add them from the Braita that were in the Bet HaMikdash. Here it says, Me'olam lo kibu geshamim eshel she'aseh ha'ma'aracha. Right, you have the fire burning on top of the Mizbeach, and this has to be burning all the time, right, 24/7. Even when it rained, the rain never put it out. That's one. And the smoke went up like a pillar, and even if all the winds came, it would not move. It would always go straight up. So that's the 2 more. Now we have 10 altogether. So good. Now we have 10. But now we have another problem. Wait a second. There are others that we could count. There's actually more than 10, right? For 2 lekads, that's it. Only 10 more. We have another braita. Vatanya Rav Shemaya bekal nebo. That's where he was from. Shibrei chere cheres niblain bimkoman. This is an interesting one. When you cook a korban in a clay pot, some of the juice gets absorbed into the pot. Now, the problem with the korban is, let's say, once one that you eat, you can only eat it for, let's say, a day, a night, and a day. Afterwards, it becomes notad. What about the juices that are absorbed into the pot? They become notad as well. So then you can never use that pot again. You can, anything you cook it or cook it in the future will not be kosher. So that's why you have to break the pot. Furthermore, you have to break it on Had Habayit. And so now you would have tons and tons of broken shards piling up on Had Habayit. The miracle is that they got absorbed into the ground and were gone. Otherwise, they would have everybody would have been cutting their feet on them. Okay. ואמר אביי מוראה ונוסה ודישון מזבח פנימי ודישון מנורה נבלעים במקומן. Furthermore, other things, right? So here's a couple more that when they had birds there, the crop and the feathers, they weren't sacrificed. So where did they go? And ashes of the inner altar and of the menorah, right? So we know the outer altar, we did dishun mizbech, and those ashes were taken off and put on the side and eventually taken out. But the ones in the kodesh, the mizbech ketoret and the menorah that also had ashes and leftover wicks, those, what happened to them? Those, they also got swallowed up in the ground, and that took care of them. So that's a question. Here we have two more miracles. How come you didn't count those? So really, we have 12 altogether. Why did the Mishnah say only 10? The answer is pisule tilatahavu. We mentioned actually 3 in the Mishnah that are really 1. We mentioned that the omer, the 2 loaves, and the showbread, those are all really the same. So count them all as 1, the fact that they never became pasul. And so since you count those 3 as 1, now you have only 8 in the Mishnah. And so we can count these 2. Now we're good. Now we have 10. But no, not quite. If you're going to count just categories, not particular things, the fact that the shards and these other items were all absorbed, that's all considered one miracle, absorption of things that need to be cleaned out. So you count that as 1. Now we only have 9. So we still need another one. Okay, we have another one, no problem. Another miracle was that when they changed over the 12 loaves every Shabbat, right, the new ones were baked recently, from Erev Shabbat, so they were nice and fresh. The miracle is that the old ones that they took out were just as fresh as from the week before. They stayed nice and hot all week, as it says in the pasuk, to put hot bread on the day it was taken away. Now the pashat of the pasuk is talking about the new bread that you're bringing in is hot, but the rabbis derive that it's this hot bread is referring to even the old one was still warm. So now we have 10. All right. But we're not done yet. Hold on, we have other sources that have other miracles. You see, they're trying to get to exactly 10, but I think it's really an excuse to bring out all the different miracles that happened, all right, and increase them. So we have a tradition that the Aron took up space. It was an amah by amah and a half. And yet it did not take up any room, any space in the Aron. In other words, although the Aron is 20 amot, this way and that way, nevertheless, the Aron itself was not included as part of that. There were still 20 amot to its sides. And so, miraculously, it didn't take up room, even though it was there. And also with the Kirubim stood by a miracle. Here is referring to not the Kirubim that were on top of the Aron. Shlomo HaMelech built giant Kirubim on the sides of it. It's amazing that he did that. It's enough that the Torah says to make Kirubim, but he made these giant ones whose wingspan was 10 amot. And the whole thing is 20 amot wide. And so he was, and so there doesn't account for the middle, the body of the Kirubim. So all that, even though it took up space, it didn't take up space. So now we have another couple of miracles. So what do you do about that? Answer, Niseh de bara'eh kachashib. Niseh de gava'eh la kachashib. When the Mishnah is listing 10, it's only listing the 10 that are outer miracles, things that everyone could see. Kodesh Kodashim, only the Kohen Gadol goes in there. No one could see that miracle. So therefore, it's not counted. Question, Joel?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Do these apply to the first Beit Hamikdash as well, or only the second one?
Only the first. Only the first had kiruvim in it, right? We're going to see. The Gemara is going to ask say exactly that. Good question. So ihachi lechem apanim namen niseh de gavaehu. Wait a second. If you're only counting outer miracles, the fact that the showbread stayed warm, that's in the kodesh. No one sees that. I mean, the Kohanim who are in there see that, but the people don't see that. It's not a public miracle, so they shouldn't count that either. We are going to answer that no. In fact, the showbread is a public miracle because sometimes they brought the shulchan out. When did they do that? Lechem apanim nised abraihu debaraehu. In fact, it is public. Damar shakish matichti bal shulchan hatahor. Tahor meklal shehu tameh. How come it describes the shulchan as being that the one that's pure, that's tahor? If you're saying it has to be tahor, that means it could become tameh. Now, is that true? Can a piece of permanent furniture be tameh? It cannot. If you have something made out of wood and it's made to be in place and not moved, then it's permanent. It's like the ground. It's like a house. House can't become tameh. If you build a house out of wood, right, it never becomes tameh. So too, if it's never moved, it would not become tameh. And not only that, if you have something made out of wood, but it's not meant to be moved, then it would actually block tum'ah. Like if you have a dead body in a building, that tum'ah spreads right down the hallways to the exit. But if you have something like this made out of wood, it would block the tumah. So not only does it not become temeh, it blocks tumah. So therefore, the shulchan, doesn't it stay in place? Why would you ever move it? If it stays in place the whole time, then it should always be tahor. Then you don't need to describe it as the tahor one, which means it could become tameh. Therefore, we see, if you say it can become tameh, that means it was moved. When was it moved? In fact, on the holidays, the Kohanim would bring the lechem apanim, the whole shulchan, out to show the people and say, look how beloved you are before the Holy One. Look how it's still warm, even though, right, just as we put it in, so too it is now. Quoting the pasuk from Shemuel, to put hot bread on the day it was taken. So there you go. The shulchan is in fact taken out. Therefore, it's a public miracle. Okay, since it's a public miracle, that's what we counted, and now we're good. We have 10. But we're not done yet. V'tuleka v'hamarav Oshaya b'shasha b'na shlomo bet hamikdash nata bo kol minei megadim shel zahav v'mosin porotehem bizmanan u'chsharuch menashevet behen noshrin shemar yirash kalebanon pirya. Here's another one. That King Solomon had these special trees that had golden fruit on it, and they would come forth with the fruit right at the right time, and the wind would come and they would drop, like you didn't have to even go climb up to get them, and you had this delicious fruit right there. As it says in Tehillim, fruit rustles like Lebanon. But when the non-Jews came and took over, they didn't get the benefit of these wonderful trees that were in the Bet HaMikdash. Shenemaru ferach Lebanon umlal. These same blossoms of Lebanon withered. Lebanon is a reference to the Bet HaMikdash, which was made out of the cedars of Lebanon. ועתיד הקדוש ברוך הוא לחזיין שנאמר פרוח תפרח ותגל אף גילת ורנן כבוד הלבנון ניתן לה. Another pasuk in Yeshaya. It's very interesting, stringing together all these pasukim from Tehillim, Nahum, and Yeshaya, that once again Hashem will bring back these trees in the future. So there you go, you have these miraculous trees. So I didn't count that. So there's 11. How come the Mishnah only said 10? The answer is Niseh de kebi'i la kachashib. Anything that's a perpetual miracle is not on the list. So if it's something that happens all the time, then you don't count it. Only things that are there from time to time, what does it count? Wait, the Aron and the Kirubim are also permanent, perpetual miracles. So that's another reason not to count them. Not only because they're in private, but also because they happen all the time. It's more amazing a miracle that happens all the time. Kind of becomes like nature. You get used to it. Only if it happens every so often, then it becomes even stronger. Yes.
Just wait. The house not becoming tameh. So all the sara'at houses that we have with the stone?
No, that becomes tameh. Does get sarat, and that is tameh. Yes,
Oh,
but they're talking about like if you have a dead body in a house, right? The things in the house, the furniture becomes tameh, but the house itself you don't have to knock down.
right.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, but that you have it where it gets into the
You do
walls of
have
the
it. Yes,
house
you
and
do
stuff
have
like
that.
that.
Yes,
Right.
right. But it
Okay.
doesn't contract. That's because it's tameh in itself, because the disease is in there. The sarat is in the wood. But if
Right.
you touch it, if someone touches it, it doesn't become tameh through that. Good.
Okay.
Now, okay, so now we got 10. Everybody's happy. We're just going back and discussing a couple of them more. You mentioned that the strong wind, right? Even the strong wind would not come and blow the smoke away. Hold on. Was there even any smoke at all? Did the fire on the mizbeach even make smoke? We have a source that it did not. There's 5 things, other miracles that happened regarding the fire on the mizbeach. Rebusa ka'ari. If you looked at it, it had a shape. The fire itself had a shape like a crouching lion. If you ever see pictures of the Bet HaMikdash, sometimes they depict it with a crouching lion on top. This is where they get it from. Ubara kahama, and that fire was clear as the sun. Yeshba mamash, and it had substance to it. I mean, you can't touch it anyway, but right, if you would be like, there was something there, something about that fire, had material. And it can consume not only dry, everything could any fire can consume dry, but even something wet, this fire could consume. Like you could put wet logs on it and it'll still be okay. And that does not make smoke. So here we have a source that the fire did not make smoke. Another source says that the smoke was like a pillar and the fire and the wind didn't move it. So which one is it? The answer is kikamrinan behejot. Oh, when we say that the smoke is not moved, that's talking about the fire that a kohen makes. And when it says that it did not make smoke at all, that's the fire that comes down from heaven. So there's really 2 sources of fire, and they act in a different way. Detanya benatenu benaron kohen esh al mizbeach. Right, after all, there's a mitzvah. The Kohanim have to light the fire, so they are also bringing fire. Even though it comes from heaven, nevertheless, mitzvah for the people to bring it themselves. There's a nice way of thinking about the interaction between human initiative and divine initiative, right? We don't rely on the miracle, right? The humans still have to do their part. Rebusa ka'ari. Now you said that it looks like a shape of a lion. Is that true? Who lived during second Bet HaMikdash. He says, I saw it and it didn't look like a lion. It looked like a dog. So that's also impressive, but still not the same. La kashya, no question. Kan b'mikdash rishon, kan b'mikdash sheni. In the first Bet HaMikdash, it looked like a lion. In the second Bet HaMikdash, which is when he lived, then it looked like a dog. I guess it's maybe less impressive. The lower level of kedusha of the second Bet HaMikdash. But we question that. And this gets to Joel's point. Well, Mikdash Sheni, mi havai. Wait, did this happen at all in the second Bet HaMikdash? V'amar Rav Shmuel bar Inya, mai dichtiv ve'erse bo ve'ekabed ve'karenan ve'ekabeda. Pasuk in Haggai says, Haggai is one of the last prophets. In the beginning of the second Bet HaMikdash period, he tells everybody, what are you doing here? Everybody, you're all living here in your homes. You didn't build the Bet HaMikdash. Everybody go and bring wood right now and rebuild the Bet HaMikdash. Ve'ersebo, and God says, I will find favor in it. Ve'ekabeda, and I will be glorified. So this word ve'ekabeda is a kri uchtib. It's written without a hair, but it's pronounced as if it does have a hair. Truth is, even without a hair, you can pronounce it ve'kabeda if it's spelled chaser, right? The hair at the end is a vowel letter. It was one of the imot HaKiriyah. But without it, it could also be read ekabed instead of ikabeda. So why do we read it with an extra hair? What does that, or rather, why is it written? I mean, you should write it the way you pronounce it. If you read it ekabeda, so write it with a hair. Why is it missing a hair in the ketib? אלו 5 דברים שהיו בין מקדש ראשון למקדש שני. It's to hint to you 5 things that you were in the first Bet HaMikdash, but were missing in the second Bet HaMikdash. What are they? Ve'elohen, Aron, ve'chaporet u'kerubim, right? Amazing. The Aron was taken somewhere at the end of the first Bet HaMikdash, right? There's some stories about that. Yirmiyah hid it, someone hid it, but they never got it again, and then never made a new one. I mean, what are you going to make a new one? What are you going to put inside? They don't have the luchot. So there was no Aron, no covering of the Aron, no kiruvim in the second Bet HaMikdash. The Kodesh Kodashim was empty. Esh, there was no fire that came down miraculously. Shekhinah, there was no Shekhinah in the second Bet HaMikdash. Ve'ruach HaKodesh, no Ruach HaKodesh, no the end of Nevuah. Ve'urim v'tumim, there was no urim v'tumim. Now, they had to be urim v'tumim because it's one of the things that the Kohen Gadol wears. But the point is that they couldn't use it to ask questions about, should they go to war? What should they do? So these are things that all didn't happen. And one of them is the fire. So why'd you just tell me that there was a fire and it looked like a dog and all that? But here it says there was no miraculous fire in the second Bet HaMikdash. The answer is, we want to reconcile it. We say, in fact, there was a miraculous fire that came down from heaven, except that it didn't help in burning anything. It was only there for show. So the actual fire that burnt the korbanot was the one that the Kohanim brought. And then there was a show fire that was miraculous, and that's the one that had the shape of a dog. So that way we can reconcile the sources.
But he just named 7. There wasn't 5.
5? That was
that wasn't 5. There's more than 5.
no. This is all one. Aron, Kaporet, and Kirubim. That's all one unit.
That's one.
That's one. You can't. If there's no Aron, you can't have.
Oh, and then there's no kaporet and there's no kirubim.
They have
Okay.
wings, but the wings don't work.
Right.
They know Rabbanan shesh ishot hen. Since you're talking about fire, there's actually 6 different kinds of fire. Yesh ochelet ve'ena shota. Yesh shota ve'ena ochelet. Some fires can consume solids but not liquids. Others can consume liquids but not solids. I'll tell you what each of these are. Yesh ochelet ve'shota. Some can consume both solids and liquids. Yesh ochelet lachin kiveshin. Others they can't consume liquid, but they can consume something that's wet and something that's dry. V'yesh esh docha esh. There is some fire that repels other fire. V'yesh esh ochelet esh. And there's other fire that consumes other fire. Okay, what are all these? Yesh esh ochelet ve'ena shota hadidan. Regular fire can consume solid, but not liquid, right? A fire can't burn water. Shota ve'ena ochelet deholin. If someone's sick with a fever, then it makes them dehydrated. So that fire that's in them is consuming all the water, but not the solid. That's the second one. Ochelet v'shota de'Eliyahu dichtib ve'et hamayim asher b'tela'a lichecha. This is when Eliyahu was on Har HaKarmel. He had the competition with Nevi'ah Baal. So Nevi'ah Baal said, tried to bring down the fire, and they couldn't do it. And then Eliyahu comes and says, bring water, right? And he makes a big circle of water around the Mizbeach, and then the fire comes down and consumes the korban and all the stuff that's wet. So they and the water. So there you go. That's the miraculous fire of Eliyahu that does consume it. This is very interesting that it comes here because you see this is probably the source of the idea of fire coming down, and so the Midrash applies that to the Bet HaMikdash as well. So taking a wet and dry, not liquid, but something wet. That's what we talked about above, that even if there's wet wood that on the Mizbeach, it would burn. Yesh esh tocha esh de Gabriel. So when Gabriel came to save Daniel and his friends they were in the Kibshan HaEsh, they were in the fire, and Gabriel is an angel, he's made out of fire. And somehow, even though he's made out of fire, he was able to come and cool off the furnace that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were in, and save them. So here's fire that can save someone from fire and push it away. Ochelet esh, yesh esh ochelet esh teshchina, tamarmor hoshit espao benehem userafan. And this is another story of fire consuming fire. This is a story that's told in Masechet Sanhedrin, that Hashem came and saved someone from fire by consuming fire. So that's a fire that consumes fire. Okay, V'ashan ha'ma'aracha, and now to get back to the Mizbeach, and you had this smoke arrangement. Is that true that you said it goes up like a straight pillar, and even a wind would not be able to blow it. We have here a source that says the wind did blow the smoke that was on top of the mizbeach. ואמר רבי יצחק אמר בר אבדימי במוצאי יום טוב האחרון של חג הכל סופין לעשן המערכה. At the end of Sukkot, we're praying for the rain, so when Sukkot is over, we would look for a sign at the wind, and to tell the wind, not, we look at a flag today or right, or a spinner, they looked at the pillar of smoke. If it was shifting to the north, meaning the wind was coming from south to north, then aniyim semechin u'balei batim asebin. Poor people were happy, and the farm owners were sad. Because something a wind that comes from the south brings a lot of rain. A lot of rain will make a lot of produce, but it will make a lot of moisture in the air. So that produce, you can only store it if it's dry. So you can have a lot of produce that can't be stored. So the poor people are celebrating. There's going to be lots of food that's cheap. We can eat this year. But the farm owners, they're upset because they have to sell everything cheaply. If the opposite, if it came from if the pillar of fire moved towards the south, so the wind is coming from the north to the south, then the farmers are happy because there'll be not so much rain, so they can sell whatever does grow, they can sell at a high price, and it's very dry, so they can store it for a long time. But the poor people will have a hard time finding food, so they are sad. If the pillar of fire is going towards the east, hakosim is coming from the west. All right, that's a westerly wind. Because that means there's just the right amount of rain when we need it, and then it'll be dry. Everybody's happy. There's plenty of produce for everyone. If it goes the other way, if the pillar moves towards the west, that means it's an easterly wind, and then everyone are going to be sad because there's not going to be any rain, not sufficient to produce anything, and everybody's going to go hungry. So all this is the question. The point is, right, that the pillar of fire does sway from the wind, right? Sways in all directions, and they look to that. So how come you told me before that it doesn't sway? The answer is that yes, the point is that it went up straight like a palm tree, and it didn't disperse. The miracle is that it didn't disperse in all directions, but that pillar did sway this way or that way, so that did happen, but the miracle nevertheless was that it stayed as one pillar. Good. Now that you mentioned the different directions and what's good and bad, we have a contradiction to that, and that will be the end of the perek. Amar mor kalape mizrach hakol semechin, kalape marav hakol asebin. If it goes from west to east, it's a good wind, and from east to west, right? Then it's everybody's sad because that means it's a bad wind. There's not going to be rain. What we know, we have a contradictory statement. Mizrachit means an easterly wind. That means it comes from the east and goes to the west. Le'olam yafa, and this one says it's good. Ma'aravit means it comes from the west and goes to the east. Le'olam kasha is not good, and that's the opposite of what we just said. That's going to be the question. Before we answer the question, I'm just going to quote the whole statement. Ruach sifonit yafa lechitin b'sha'ah sheviu shelish ve'kasha lezetim bizman shehen chontin. A northerly wind comes from the north. It's good for the wheat when the wheat is already grown 1/3, so it'll continue to grow well. But it's not good for olives at the time of ripening. So from the north is good for wheat, bad for olives. The opposite, if it comes from the south, then it's bad for the wheat and it's good for the olives. How do you remember that? Here's a mnemonic. Shulchan basafon umenorah badarom. Right, in the Kodesh, we have the shulchan is here in the north, and the menorah is in the south. What do you put on the shulchan? Wheat. What do you put on use for the menorah? Oil. So there you go. Each one is in its place. The wind that's coming from the north is good for the wheat because the shulchan is in the north. and the menorah that's in the south brings wind that is good for oil because it needs the oil. Okay, that was all a tangent. The main question was, what about these winds? Is the easterly wind good or not? Westerly wind good or not? Answer is lakashya halan vehalehu. Is no problem. One's talking about in Bavel, one's talking about in Eretz Yisrael. In Bavel, where they have they rely on rivers. So since they have rivers, if it's dry, if there's no rain, it's good for them because things will still grow, and it's dry. They can store them for a long time. That way, so that reason they like when there's no rain. So that's why they like the westerly wind. But and Eretz Yisrael, or east wind, right? That's why the easterly wind is okay. Eastern wind from the east is okay. Whereas in Eretz Israel, where they rely on the rain, so then they really need the rain. So if it's going to be no rain, they're going to have a problem, and that's why it's the opposite for Eretz Israel. Hadan alach shiv'at yamim chazakim uberuchim, on completing the first perek.